What's happening, fishing friends? Listen, I gotta ask you a question. How many times have you heard people in the fall say, if you want to catch more fish, you gotta match the hatch? Or on the opposite side of things, you got somebody telling you, hey, you're throwing stuff that everybody else is throwing. Throw something different. Throw something that they've never seen. You'll catch a whole bunch more fish. And the last thing I hear is, listen, in the fall, downsize. Go with a little bit of finesse. You're going to catch more fish. That's the way you catch those stingy bass. Listen, I've heard all three of those things, and I think there's some truth and also some misconceptions that go along with each. So that's what we're talking about today, starting with matching the hatch. You know, you hear all the pros, everybody talking about the big lakes. If there's shad there, I only care about shad. If you want to catch fish in the fall, throw little shad type baits. In the fall, shad are smaller, you know, couple inches long. Throw something to mimic that, something like a small paddle tail, underspin, you know, little compact spinner bait, A-rig, all these things to mimic little schools of shad. But hey, listen, what if you fish small lakes and ponds like around here in Iowa that don't have any shad? I think it really depends on a few things and where you live. Up here in the Midwest, I'm in Iowa, fall is pretty quick. It's not a long drawn out thing, and I can't fish all year. You know, there's a certain time that fish realize that winter's coming, the temperatures are dropping, the days are getting shorter, you know, daylight till the end of the day, 6:30, something like that is, sundown right now, which stinks. But fish sense that, they understand what's going on, and they feed up that fall feed. They're getting ready for winter because fish can only grow at certain water temperatures. It's not that they stop eating in winter. You can still catch fish, you know, ice fishing like I do, but they're only growing through a certain amount of time, a certain amount of period where that metabolism is higher. Once they start to get to those really cold temperatures like up here, their metabolism slows way down. They're just not growing, as opposed to, you know, bass in the south. They have a longer, warmer period. You know, in February, they're already catching bedding bass, you know, in Texas, which that's months away from me here in Iowa. So I think it's a number of different things. Number one, matching the hatch, I think definitely comes into play when fish are absolutely zoned in, feeding on one specific type of bait fish. So if your lake really only has just shad, you know, you really don't ever see bluegill or any type of sunfish, no perch or anything like that. If it is dominant shad lake, I think it can help. But again, like some of the lakes that I fish around here, last fall there was a place that was literally like hundreds of yards of bait fish, little tiny shad jumping. And when you've got that many, how do you catch fish in that? If I've got a little, you know, 2-inch swim bait, but there's bajillions of real shad out there, why would they choose to eat my shad out of all the other ones that are real? That is where I think matching the hatch can hurt you. For example, I know I've been showing you this a lot, but Dad and I were out on the Mississippi River. You're also going to see another one coming up with topwater lures. This is a 4.5-inch larger topwater bait. Now, the fish that we were catching, one of the pike that I caught spit up just a little guy you see on screen there, a little 2-inch shad that matched like the little Mega Bass 3-inch paddle tail that I had perfectly. But I threw that paddle tail around and I couldn't get any bites. They were pushing bait to the top. I was working the walking bait like this and they were hitting it. So I think matching it to a T sometimes can hurt you, but like in this case, they were chasing bait fish on the top. I was matching the bait fish that they were putting up there as far as the action, topwater walking bait. It looks just like a bait fish running. And I think that's one way you can get around that if you don't have, you know, exactly what they're eating, trying to mimic and get them to react to it, not necessarily thinking, okay, they're always going to be hungry, I'm just going to match what they're eating. Another issue with match the hatch, you know, everybody's thinking shad, little tiny bait fish. You know, if you want to catch fish in the fall, match the hatch, but guess what? Bass are still eating these things. Craws. People forget about the craw. I feel like everybody's talking about match the hatch with bait fish when they're pushing them. Man, sometimes there's just so much of those, or they're in places, you know, if you're a bank angler, you can't reach them. You can't run after those schools of fish. So going to places that are going to hold warmth, rocks, you know, under docks with metal or, you know, big pieces of wood, that's going to hold warmth, and that's going to tend to draw fish, especially as it gets later into fall. And those are great spots to hit. So don't just think that match the hatch is only, you know, bait fish. Don't forget about craws. These type of things, they still catch them. The next argument is throw something different. Throw something that these fish have never seen, something different than all the other anglers going down the bank throwing, and you'll catch fish. While I think this holds true to some point, so I'm going to say there are times where I feel like certain little color changes, if you fish a lake where you notice they're really into chartreuse, throwing a jig like this is one I made specifically for around here. Green pumpkin, a little bit of blue in it with just a touch of chartreuse. There's some lakes around here that I feel like if you put just a little tip of chartreuse on it, especially in the dirty water that we have around here, it does change the bite as opposed to throwing the standard black and blue or just an all green pumpkin. Now, That's not everywhere. There's places I can do those changes and I don't have any sort of difference. Talking something like this, purple, black and purple, or brown and purple, for whatever reason seems to get a bit more consistently for me around here in the Midwest than just like a black and blue or an all green pumpkin. Not to say that those don't work. I throw those and there's times that that's all I've got. I'm going with it. But I think that sometimes these little color differences do change that, do make a difference. For instance, a little bit of orange. You can see that in the dirty water. It stands out. I was out on the boat with Brando throwing a little craw, one of those katana craws that I had dipped in orange, and I was getting bites. I was getting more bites than him. We talked about that. He's like, dude, do you think it's because you dipped that in orange? He was throwing just like a little, green pumpkin jig like me. I was throwing a little Ned rig. Is that the difference? Is it the difference between a skirt and a non-skirt? Is everybody flipping jigs there in that little Ned rig profile? I don't know, it's hard to tell, but the second part of this, throw something different, throw something that people have never seen. I think the bigger thing to focus on this is everybody's hitting the easy stuff in the fall, right? You've got guys going down the banks, going to the back of the creeks looking for these fish. I would challenge you to find fish in places that they're not going to. So if there's a bunch of really easy places to get to, the main lake points, secondary points, everybody's probably hitting those, right? You see guys, beating down the banks, throwing all that stuff. I would say try to pay attention to what they're throwing, where they're throwing, and try to differentiate that way. So if they're really not going to the back of these smaller creeks because they're harder to get to, it's a little bit more of a run to get to it, go to those. If you're a bank angler, don't go to these ponds that are right off the road. Everybody's hitting those in the fall, right? Go to these places that are a little bit more off the beaten path, places that you couldn't get to in the summer because it was full of vegetation. Well, in the fall now, things are going to be dying off. You can get to those places again. So I would say challenge yourself to go to the places that they're not going, and instead of going crazy off the wall, make some subtle changes. So this was a transparent pink jerkbait that I painted up. Is there anything in the places that I fish that are pink and like translucent pearl silver? No, but it's a little bit different look. And I think it's something that this profile is something that the fish are used to. These skinny, longer, I've heard people talk about this a lot. Bass don't target bluegill as much. They target these longer, skinnier bait fish. So when they eat it, it's just like a piece of spaghetti going down as opposed to a big, huge round burger for them trying to eat it. It's, a profile thing. So those colors might match. They might be a little bit different, but I think this is a profile that they see a lot, and then more apt to eat it. Now we can go down the rabbit hole of, is it how you're working the bait compared to the next guy? How fast, how slow? There's a ton of variables, but I would say instead of throwing completely off the wall, try to go one, where not everybody's going, and two, try to make subtle little differences, like rattling crankbaits, for example. Everybody's going down throwing a rattling 1.5, right? I think silent crankbaits get overlooked a lot around here. So instead of going to an off-the-wall crank, try going to a silent crankbait instead of one with rattles. Okay, now the third big thing I hear is if you want to catch more fish in the fall, you got to downsize. You got to go finesse. Everybody's throwing the big swim baits, the big crankbaits, the big spinner baits. Go finesse and you will catch more fish. Now listen, I think this is a regional thing because if you try throwing, this is one of the little hot shot minnows from X Zone. Cool little thing. I've actually got a bunch of different uses. It's going to be a video coming up. But if you're throwing something like this in real dirty, muddy water, there's a good chance the fish aren't going to be able to feel it. They aren't going to see it. So I think it's a regional thing. The cleaner, clearer water you get to with higher pressure, I think this stuff does matter. That's why, guys in the north fishing for smallmouth, they're going with light line, 6. Some of these dudes using 4-pound leader line because the fish get so line shy. There's so many people throwing at these fish and it's so clear. It does make a difference. But I think around here, the bigger thing to pay attention to is going with something that going with something that you like, and maybe just downsizing slightly because again, as that water's getting colder, oftentimes they're not looking for that big, huge, crazy meal. When you're ice fishing, I've caught 2-pound bass on the little tiny micro jig that I'm fishing for bluegill for. So I would say go with something that you're used to instead of going with the big, huge jig. Believe it or not, this Kitech mono spin jig a couple years ago, I caught a number of fish on it. The biggest that day was like 4 3/4, just under 5-pound bass on this little tiny spinning jig. 3/32 ounce, and you're catching big fish on it. Oftentimes they're not looking for this big, huge, crazy thing moving fast, slowing down. So the word finesse oftentimes has different meanings, and I think people automatically think, oh, if you say finesse, it means small, tiny, right? We could be talking about more of a finesse presentation. So instead of going with, you're ripping a jig and you're really bouncing it, working it in more of a finesse way, just slowly dragging it. To me, finesse has multiple meanings. So when I hear that, I think a lot of new people just go right into the mindset of, oh, he said finesse, it means something little tiny, Ned rig, right? You can have a finesse spinnerbait. You know, some of the spinnerbaits are big. You could drop down to a more compact finesse, like some of these. So you can see the size, they're 1/2 ounce. That's not small, that's a pretty heavy lure. But the size of that, I mean, that's easily covered up on my hand. It's got small blades, a smaller compact profile. To me, this is a finesse spinnerbait, where most people would say, oh, a spinnerbait's a power fishing lure, right? So just because people are saying, you know, it's fall, you have to downsize and get finesse on them, I don't think that's always true depending on where you fish. And you can get finesse on how you fish. I hope that makes sense because I have a lot of new people asking me about that. And I think it's in the way you present it, not necessarily the size of the lure. Listen, fishing friends, do me a favor, comment below and let me know out of these three, do you hear these constantly? And as a new angler, which one do you feel like you kind of get spun out on, or you've heard it and you're like, listen, I've tried this and it's not making any sense to me. What do they really mean? Comment below and let me know. And if you've been fishing for a while, is there one that you always hear and you're like, well, I used to believe that, but I've kind of switched. And today's subscribed fishing friend is it Ty Carbide, TI Carbide? Always commenting, always watching. I appreciate you folks so much. But he said he just smashed them on a whopper plopper. And I've had people telling me, you know, you've heard it on the internet and everything, oh, whopper ploppers are dead, they don't work anymore. So you have to take stuff with a grain of salt, and it often is, I think, regional. You know, there's some baits that just, you know, crush in the Ozarks, you know, wigglewort, those type of things. You know, a ghost crow, like a green ghost caw color, or a table rock shad. You know, certain places where certain colors do great in a, you know, a specific body of water, like the, what is it, June bug red, or like red shad type worms. I forget the lake, but certain lake, if you're not throwing that, you're not getting bites. So take stuff with what you hear with a, you know, kind of a grain of salt, and try to adapt it to your places. It might not always be true. Sometimes it might. I hope this worked out. I want to do more of these. I used to call this series for my OGs, Fish Food for Thought. It was kind of a fun play on words, dad stuff. A bunch of people hated like the title and said it was dumb, but they liked the content in the video. So we're going to try to bring some of those back, some more how-to type stuff. I want to keep the videos going because I appreciate the support from all of you. So listen, it's enough for me. I got to go edit. Thank you all for watching, and until next time.